So I've actually coined that term for myself, a successful conversation, rather than, am I going to win this argument? And if I can remind myself that I'm trying to have a successful conversation, I find I approach the conversation differently. And as I try to have one of these successful conversations, I try to keep 3 things in mind. So the first of these 3 is to listen. Basic, I think we're getting better at that sometimes. Sometimes we forget it. We have to listen to ideas even that are abhorrent to us. We have to listen even to facts that we feel are misrepresenting the situation. And we have to remember that just as we say that you don't have to agree with someone to sit across the negotiating table with them, that's part of our own position, that it applies to our own conversations, that to listen to someone does not mean to agree with them. And we really need to practice hearing things that we don't like. And sometimes we'll get lucky and we'll hear things we do like. I recently gathered a group of people, about 10 or so people, to air thoughts and feelings about the situation in Gaza. And among this group, there was one Israeli woman. So I was a little worried how this group was going to go for her, as the one Israeli in the group. And when it came her turn, she let out rather a torrent of an angry defense of Israel. And I just practiced clamping my mouth closed and listening to my heart race. And when she was finished, we moved on to other people's turns. And at the end of the group, not expecting to hear a comment from her, she spoke up and said how much she appreciated being heard and how much she appreciated all of the different perspectives that had been shared in this group. And from what she had said, one would never have known that. One would never have known that she was able to take in or appreciate other people's perspectives. And it reminded me of 2 things. One is that what people say is not the whole story of what they think. And the other is that sometimes what we say is just what we need to get off of our chest. And it's not necessarily even related to what we think. So I try to remember that when I'm remembering to listen. The second is to share my perspective and to share information without trying to convince someone to come around to my viewpoint. And this is a hard habit to break, at least for me. I have fondly held on to the belief that I really could convince people to come around in arguments. And I've tried it so many times that I'm actually starting to give it up. Several years ago, I was a student rabbi in a congregation in Florida, and one of my favorite relationships was with a congregant who I'll call Stan, who was a lovely person and who disagreed with me on almost everything about Israel. And so he gave me many opportunities to argue and to try out convincing him to come to my point of view. And he gave me an equal number of opportunities to find out that it was ineffective and that I was never going to bring him toward my position by arguing. Toward the end of my time, toward the end of my first year with that congregation, let's see, I'm trying to remember the dates, but after 9/11, I shared a story with the congregation in the context of a Friday night talk. And in it, I talked about a phone call to a close Palestinian friend of mine after 9/11. And the first thing she said was, when I sent her my family's good wishes, sending my love for my extended family who she had met, my Palestinian friend Nazira said, "Do they hate us?" And of course I rushed to say, "My family doesn't hate you. Nobody hates you." And after that conversation, the following day, I spoke to my brother. And I said, "Nazira sends her love." I talked to her. And before I could say another thing, my brother said, "Do they hate us?" And I just stopped. I said, "Of course they don't," but I heard her voice and his voice in my mind. And I was able to tell this story to my congregation. And it was after that weekend that I spent with the congregation that I received a note from Stan saying, I don't know how or if this will affect my politics, but I actually saw the Palestinians as human beings in a way that I had never before. And I was able to hear you. That was the first thing I really heard from you on the topic. So, listening, sharing our thinking without trying to convince people to come our way. And finally, out of that story also comes the third point, which is to be personal. And I'll say finally that we can tell that it's the personal story often that helps people to be able to hear something in a way that they could never hear it before. And in order to be personal, we have to have material. We have to have personal content to share. And so we have to pursue talking with Palestinians and Israelis. We need to go to Israel. We need to, when we go there, we need to seek out personal conversations, ask people what their lives are like, what they really think. And we can't always hop on a plane and go to Israel, but we know people in our communities. And sometimes we just know them and we don't think of ourselves as having a political relationship with them. But the Israeli teachers who teach in the religious school at my congregation, they're not going to talk politics with me unless I sit down at lunch and say, what do you think? But when I do that, I get stories that I can then share, which go beyond my own personal experience, but which are still personal. So listen, try to have conversations where we're not trying to bring someone exactly to our position, and be personal.